Okay, today we're talking about trig. In order to be in calculus, you had to have had trig either in high school or here at a college. So we do expect you to know some trig, so I'm going to go through that kind of quickly. If you are planning to use your calculator, which you can as long as it's one of our approved calculators, which you can find in the Canvas course, make sure you set your calculators to radian measure only. We will not be using degree. But you do have special angles. Your special angles are 30, 45, and 60. So talking about those for a second. 30 degrees, of course, are pi over 6. So you'd have pi over 6, which is 30 degrees. You'd have pi over 4, which is 45 degrees. Pi over 3 is 60 degrees. Erase those. You would also have pi over 2, which is 90 degrees. Pi, as you notice, is 180 degrees. And 2 pi, the whole circle, would be 360 degrees. Okay, basic trig identities, I am not going to make you memorize a whole bunch of them, but there are some basic ones that you definitely need to know. Okay, first of all, sine of theta equals opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine of theta equals adjacent over hypotenuse. And tangent of theta equals opposite over adjacent. Okay, and those of course are your sides of your right triangles. Now, you also need to remember that the cosecant of theta is 1 over the sine of theta. Now that is one I'm expecting you to know. The secant of theta is 1 over the cosine of theta. And the cotangent of theta is 1 over the tangent of theta. Lastly, let's see if I can find some room. Lastly, you need to know one of your other basic rules, and it is this. Your basic Pythagorean trig identity would be sine squared plus cosine squared is 1. Okay, so that's what we have starting out, and that's what you're going to need to know. Okay, moving on along. Oops, went too far. So when you talk about the triangles, when I teach trig, I concentrate on triangles. Some other teachers concentrate on unit circles, others charts. I do not care which method you use, but you have to find one and you need to stick with it. So I'm going to go with triangles. Okay, these triangles are not drawn to scale. Oops, I hit a button. Sorry about that. In a 60-degree triangle, you have certain relationships, and that's 1, 2, and the square root of 3. Okay, so in a 60-degree triangle, square root of 3 is opposite the 60, the hypotenuse is 2, and your adjacent side is 1. So when you start thinking about this one, that's, of course, 60 is pi over 3. The sine of pi over 3 is opposite over hypotenuse. So opposite over hypotenuse. The cosine of pi over 3 is adjacent over hypotenuse, so that would be 1 over 2. And the tangent of pi over 3 would be opposite over adjacent. Opposite over adjacent. And that's what that basic angle would look like. And of course that's 60. So the sine of pi over 3, cosine of pi over 3, and tangent of pi over 3 are listed there. Okay, next let's go to 45. Of course these, again, they're not drawn to scale. 45 would be 1, 1, and the square root of 2. When you get ready to do the sine of pi over 4 is opposite over hypotenuse. The cosine of pi over 4 is adjacent over hypotenuse. You'll see they're the same. And the tangent of pi over 4 is opposite over adjacent. Now, one of the questions that I asked you on the quiz is one of these pi over 4 angles. I can't remember which one. Pi over 4 trig functions. I can't remember which one. But I leave my answer with the radical in the denominator. It is okay to leave your radical in the denominator, so just be aware of that. Your last basic angle is 30. And again, it's not drawn to scale again, just putting up there for the ratios. When you get ready to do your 30 angle, 1 is opposite 30. So 1 is on the opposite side of 30. So again, it's 1, 2, and the square root of 3, since 30, 60, 90 triangles go together. 30, of course, is pi over 6. So we would do the sine of pi over 6, the cosine of pi over 6, and the tangent of pi over 6. The sine of pi over 6 is opposite over hypotenuse. Opposite over hypotenuse. The cosine of pi over 6 is adjacent over hypotenuse, and the tangent is opposite over adjacent. Now, again, these are what I use to find basic trig functions. Some of you might choose to use the unit circle. Now, I'm not proficient in the unit circle. I know how to use it, but it's not my favorite. But if it is your favorite, you are welcome to use it. However, you will have to memorize it in order to use it on your test. It will not be provided for you on any test. Okay, I want to go through one more slide, and then we'll create a new file so it doesn't get too large. Whoops. Okay, the last one I want to talk about is what happens on the quadrants. So I do usually, in my class, I'll draw up a unit circle, my own unit circle, and I'll put points on there. Unit circle means it goes out 1 in each direction. So this point means it goes out 1 and up 0. And this point here means it went over 0 and up 1. And this point here means it went over to the left, which would be -1, 0, and up 0. And this one at the bottom means it went over 0 and down 1. So that's how that would look. Now, I want to talk about what happens at these angles. Okay, of course, this is the angle 0. This is the angle 90, which is pi over 2. This is the angle 180, which is pi, and this is the angle 270, which is 3 pi over 2. Now you'll notice when I put these on here, I labeled them as points. You'll also know the computer kind of overruns some of it. The computer overlay, I guess. So I want to try to fix those really fast. Apologize. Maybe that's a little better. So when I get ready to do what I call quadrantal angles, because they're on the quadrants, I use these points. And I put them in alphabetical order with a C and an S. C, S, C, S, C, S. C comes first, so I put it first. Now, when I get ready to do these, I use these little tricks. Let's say that I asked you, what is the cosine of 2 pi? Well, 2 pi is the same thing as 360. So if we went all the way around the circle to here, I would be located, let's turn it blue, on this point right here. Well, the cosine at this point right here is 1. So that answer would be 1. Let's say I asked you, what is the sine of pi? Okay, well, pi is over here at 180. Here's the sine of pi right here. Sine is the S. So the sine of pi at this point would be 0. All you have to do for sine and cosine is use the unit circle points. Okay, let's try 2 more of these. Let's try cosine of 3 pi over 2. Okay, so 3 pi over 2 is at the bottom. Cosine is right here, so cosine would be 0. And lastly, the one I want to try, the last one, let's do tangent. Let's do, which one have we not done? Tangent of pi over 2. Okay, well, I only have C's and S's up there. I don't have a T. So you have to remember that tangent is the same thing as sine over cosine. So if I look at my 90-degree angle, the sine is 1 and the cosine is 0. And 1 over 0 is undefined. So that means the tangent is undefined at that particular point.